Good morning. How is everyone? So this is a video to go over the exam and also to just talk about any issues that people are having. So I'm going to go over the layout on Blackboard. We're going to look again at the instructions for the exam. And then we're going to go into the questions, and I'm going to talk about the details of the questions and point you in the right direction, so you have some cues to take in completing your final exam. So let me just make some general remarks. The due date is Sunday, the 24th at 11:59 p.m. And if you're going to have any issues, so given this situation we're in, it's a kind of snafu situation, messed up, which is status quo right now. Please, you need to let me know before the day it's due. If you're emailing me on the day that it's due, that you need more time, you're telling me that, like, you actually did have the time and you're just, oh, you got to the end and I really just didn't finish it and I want more time. More time is for people who really need it. And part of the way you demonstrate you need it is you get in touch with me in advance to let me know. Okay, so the next thing, the final exam is exactly the same format as the midterm. The questions are different. In a second, we're going to look at those questions and the instructions and so on and so forth. And the text that it's going to evolve are Plato's Apology, the book 8 of the Republic, dealing with the allegory of the cave, and then Othello. Right? So you're only being tested on material from the second half of the semester. Let me make some important general claims. I have put a number of videos up online. I have put PowerPoints up online. I have given you copious amounts of material to study from. And if you've been keeping up with watching the videos, now I understand that I've gotten them up late. If you get in reading response assignments late, that's no big deal. But it is absolutely imperative, if you think you're going to perform well on these exams, you must look at the study materials that I have gone to great extent to provide you. I have invested a substantial portion of my time to produce those videos, things that otherwise I would have just talked about in class. And, you know, a number of these things, I don't even have my original notes in front of me because I'm no longer in New York for the time being. I had to relocate to my folks' place so that I could have them take care of our daughter. And so I have put together a lot of work. I've done really the best I know how under these circumstances, but I have tried to give you everything that I can give in the unusual circumstances we're in to make this like a normal class. So, you know, those videos, you know, you can watch while you're, you know, eating breakfast. You can follow along with the book, you know, with the PowerPoint there. They're long lectures, but I've got a lot of material there, and I've given you the tools to succeed on this exam, and it is your obligation to make the most of them. Okay, so that said, the exam is due, as I've said, on the 24th. Grades are due sometime the first week of June, so early on in June. And the problem is, if you know, my goal is to have everybody with a grade at grading time because I have a deadline. So part of your deadline is predicated on the fact that I have a hard deadline of turning in grades. And I do not want to be in the position of having to give students incompletes except under the most extraordinary circumstances. And I am only giving an incomplete Let me be clear. I am only giving an incomplete for students who have done a thorough job of communicating with me in advance, sufficient advance, not like on the day before I have to turn grades in, that you need a certain amount of time, and you have explained, no, I don't need to know every last detail of your personal life. It's not for me to know everything. You feel comfortable with what you can tell. But the point is, I do need to have a substantive, a material reason for you needing that kind of extension. And if you can explain it to me, I'm happy to grant it. But I expect that to be the exception and not the rule. Okay. So with that said, I think probably what I'm going to do is I will produce one more video as a kind of summation of the course. I think that's appropriate. I have selected the readings we have read, both because I think they're significant historically, they're substantial in terms of their meaning, and they're enjoyable. But I've also tried to group together works that have themes that either are extensions and continuations of other text, or ones that when set side by side reveal things by having distinctions rather than similarities. Right? So I've tried to put all the material for this course together in a way that all the readings can play off one another. And in the lectures, as you've noticed, I've tried to constantly refer back to other readings and make those kind of comparisons and those connections. The fancy, pretentious scholarly word is intertextual. Those intertextual relations. It sounds great. If you can say intertextuality, you are set for life in the world of academia. So I'm going to make another video just kind of tying things off, and particularly I'm going to produce a little reading response assignment that's going to be like a 5-10 minute thing. That's it. And I'm actually just going to ask you the things you liked in the course, as well as the things you didn't like, the things that you hoped to be in it, and maybe things that were there, things that weren't there. Just for my own reference point, a professor, a teacher, is simply a student who's had a little more time learning the material than the students they teach. So I am always looking for ways to be better as a professor. I'm always looking for ideas. I do my best to try to marry what I think is really important and what university education demands, what a world lit class demands, and try to meet that with what do I think students are going to find interesting, what are they going to find engaging, or how can I take a difficult text that may be, what's the word, that may be opaque or challenging to students, and find a way to make that engaging, show students why it's worth reading and spending the time that we spend, and so on and so forth. So I'm really interested to get some feedback. Okay, so with that said, let us turn with brevity to the final exam. So here we have Blackboard, and let me just go over it just to make it as clear as possible. So here's assignments. We've gone to assignments, and then we go down, and I think everybody's already onto this. It's been up for a while, right? So here is the exam right here. We click on it, and we've got the final exam. This is the Word document, right? And this is the Turnitin function, where you go to, I guess I can do this myself, right? You go right here, and you find your name, and then you submit, right? Very simple, right? So remember, just use a basic Word format document or some related type program. Don't use any newfangled thing or anything unusual. You can use PDF file, works as well. You'll notice that Turnitin accepts different types of files. Okay, So let's go back. And then if we click on the exam file, of course, we get our exam. So here is our exam. And I want to stress, and I'm getting through the midterms, and I want to stress, stress, stress. Follow the instructions. Follow the instructions. These are words of profound wisdom. I couldn't have come up with them myself. I had to get them from a book. Follow the instructions, right? I have these instructions here for a reason, right? In particular, I think it helps both to leave the instructions and the questions in on the final. And when you turn in your paper, and I am explicitly, red light flashing, asking you to leave the questions in on the final exam. And particularly do this. Leave them all in just as they're found here. Do not break them up and intersperse them with your answer. Now let me be clear. I hope this doesn't confuse anyone to be this nuanced, right? I don't think this is too much. When you do the exam, when you write the exam, if you want to break up the subsections of that question as an outline and use them to structure your answer, by all means, I am encouraging you to do that. However, once you've finished your work, you want to remove that outline, the skeleton of that outline, and just have your answers and have all the question at the top and all of the answer below it, right? To be absolutely clear. Okay, so let's go over it very quickly. 12 font. Please don't play games with the size. Please don't play games with the margins. 1.5 spaced. 1.5 spaced. Obviously, it's not going to be stapled. You're going to answer 2 questions. The first question is mandatory, and then you get to choose from 2 questions. You choose one of the 2 questions for a total of 2 questions you need to answer. Each answer will be 2 pages for a total of 2 times 2 equals 4 pages, right? And that is answer from beginning to end. That is not including the question, right? We've got all this down now. The 2-page limit is really if you go a hair under or you go a hair over, what's the expression? No harm, no foul. But if you're giving me 4 pages for one answer, or if you're giving me 1 page, not going to work. Part of the assignment is to write in a way and edit, because nobody writes it right the first time. Ernest Hemingway, he said the first draft of everything is shit. And other authors have said the first draft of anything or everything ends up in the vertical file, which is also known as the trash can. Right? Nobody writes it perfectly the first time. You're being, to come back to a key point, you're being graded on your writing and the structure and clarity of your essay, and you're being graded on the substance. Obviously, those 2 things are intertwined, but the only way you can write a good essay in terms of the writing is to proofread. Absolutely. And part of the assignment is to be able to write these answers in a direct way within the space allotted, right? And that means writing with purpose and writing with focus and writing something in the most direct and concise way possible. That is an art, and that doesn't happen the first time for anybody. And I can tell you right now, I'm working on my own work, and boy, I write something and I come back to it and I said, I didn't write that, did I? I hope I didn't write it, because that's doo-doo, right? Because yes, I have the idea there that I want to say, but it's not in a concise, direct way. And if I were a third party reading this, I'm not sure I'd get the idea that I want them to get from it. I'm not sure they'd get the idea I want them to get from it. So answers, I'm not going to go through everything here in detail. I'm just going to highlight a few things that I think are important based on, what I see on the midterms, which is proofreading is not really about spelling and grammar. I expect that to be taken. I feel like I should be able to take that for granted as a professor, that you can spell and write grammatically, especially with the help of the various functions on word processing applications. But key thing, meaning and intelligibility. You must read every sentence you've written and say to yourself, does this sentence make sense? Is this what I'm trying to say? Is there enough substance there? Is this sentence too general, too distant from the substance of the text, not specific enough in what's actually being said? So one important thing I'm looking for is specificity in every sentence you write. That, yes, there are certain general claims you have to make, but even then you can kind of flesh them out with specific references to the text. But then in supporting those claims, you need to get to the facts and the specific facts of the text. And that means staying what is often referred to as close to the text, meaning close to the particulars, reflective of the particulars rather than just general claims. Then there's the issue of just the logical flow of ideas from one thing to the next. You build from general ideas to specific, and there needs to be a clear causal connection, a logical connection between one sentence and the next. I find that when I write, that I really need to, like, I look at a paragraph and I say, wow, every sentence I have is actually a really good sentence. But when I look at the flow of the sentences, they're not really going together. These ideas, it turns out that what I thought were related ideas, this is actually a thought that goes in this paragraph. This is a thought that goes here. And this sentence comes before this one, because before I can say this, I need to establish this point. And these are the kind of things that ideally are, like you have a writing center or you have a class where we have the luxury of sitting down and talking about your writing in person. I'm happy to look at drafts if you'd like to send them to me, but I encourage you to send them as soon as possible. Just the last couple things. It is really important, and I think what I see so far in the midterms is indicative of what I often see. You need to cite the text. You need to cite the text. The answers to these questions are in the text, right? There are many places in a text. The type of questions I ask are large thematic questions where there's probably a number of examples you could use to illustrate what's being asked. So, I don't expect you're not going to have a total familiarity with the whole text. It ain't happening. But in my videos, I have taken you into specific passages and dwelt on them at great length, along with giving you general principles and ideas and so on and so forth. So when you give your answers, you need to stay specific, you need to paraphrase from the text, and you need to cite the text. And when you do that, you need to cite, just need to cite the page number. That's really important. The answers are in the book. So to just be clear again, number 14 here. Under no circumstance should you be using a secondary source, an interpretive source of the primary text. If you cut and paste stuff from online, if you use an outside source and don't cite it, particularly if you don't cite it, first of all, that's plagiarism, and that's going to be an automatic failing grade for your exam. If you cite it, a secondary source, that's going to hurt you, but at least you're not stealing it and pretending that it's yours. This is not a research paper. What you're asked to do is not to synthesize secondary literature. What you're asked to do is analyze and interpret a text and show me what you understand. I want to know what you think. And, we've talked about this from the beginning of the semester. What you think is what you think. Is there a right or wrong answer? I'll tell you, the wrong answer is the one that you discover you're not able to support with evidence from the text. And the right answer is the one that you're able to find evidence in the text for. So, there are lots of ideas to be had in answering these questions. There are lots of points of view. You're going to have your opinion, but if the opinion and its validity is based on your ability to support it with evidence from the text. Okay, so now we go to question 1, and this is a mandatory question, right? Which means you have to answer it, and this is about Othello. So at the outset, to kind of set up the issue with Othello, I am recalling and asking you about Plato's allegory of the cave in a very brief kind of synoptic analysis of what that is about. So, number 1, the problem of appearance and reality is perhaps the central theme of Plato's allegory of the cave. So that's not a question, that's a statement, right? So then here, ABC, are the 3 parts of the question. Explain what is meant by the distinction, i.e. the distinction between appearance and reality, and what do you believe is the central moral of the allegory of the cave and what it relates to. What is the problem here, and why is it a problem, right? So there's these people in a cave, and we talked about in the video and in the PowerPoint very explicitly what an allegory is. An allegory is a kind of symbolic or metaphorical way of talking about an issue that is actually a real-world issue. So it's a kind of mythic way of dressing up an issue from the real world and transferring it into this the imaginary world of this cave and the shadows on it and so on. So everything in the cave really refers to, at least I think Plato has the intention of implying that everything discussed in this cave is a real world analogies. They can be translated into elements of the real world. So B, drawing on this distinction from part A, how does the issue manifest in Shakespeare's Othello? So in my lectures, particularly in the 4th one, and in the PowerPoint, I spend time explaining again this distinction, and some of it's a review, and then the part that's not a review is an application of this framework to Othello. And why I think it's appropriate is because it's very clear in Shakespeare's language, particularly in Iago's language, that there is a clear intention on riffing or playing on this theme of appearance and reality. How does this problem manifest in relation to Othello as a character in the situation? Among other things, address why the main character is so vulnerable to certain false appearances, and how does it relate to Iago as a character and his plot. So let's just state the obvious here, that this issue of appearance and reality has everything to do with Iago's plot, right? But then there's also, if you watch the videos and look at my PowerPoint, you'll see that this also has something to do with certain philosophical ideas coming from Machiavelli, and also it has something to do with the way in which Renaissance Venetian society is depicted, which is of course the setting of this drama. And then C, provide and cite examples, plural, meaning more than one, of the problem of appearance and reality in Othello. So here's where basically the question is this. I ask you to establish the principles of this thing, then I ask you to establish them in relationship to Othello, and then I'm asking for specific examples. Compare and contrast the symbolic meaning of the shadows of the wall in the cave with the various appearances in the play that appear to him or Othello to be the ocular proof of his wife's infidelities. And there are some really key examples, things I mention often, and there are also some, I mean, there are many examples, is the point, because this is so central to Iago's plot. And ocular proof, talked about it in the video. Ocular proof means the visual proof. But the problem in the play is that the visual proof turns out to be no proof at all. Because just like the prisoners misinterpret the nature or the meaning of the shadows, Othello misinterprets the evidence he's given. It is visual, or you might say physical evidence, and physical evidence always seems to be the best kind of evidence, but actually here it turns out that the physical evidence, it's what matters is not that it's physical, what matters is what it really means, and unfortunately Othello misinterprets its actual meaning. Now part 2, you choose one, so that you have 2 questions with 1 answer for each, the total of 2, 4 pages, so on and so forth. Now, these, one deals with, number 2 deals with Apology of Socrates, and number 3 deals with exclusively the allegory of the cave. Right? So let me just be clear. In number 1, I'm just prefacing the questions with allegory of the cave. In number 1, the real focus is Othello, the text Othello, the play. So one nice thing I've done here is that the questions for 2 and 3 are largely derived from the reading response questions. So if you want them to form like the rough draft of your paper, that's perfectly fine. But you're now asked not to just write kind of dashed off reading response answers. You're asked to write a polished essay here. So number 2, in Plato's Apologies, Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, first of all, what does he mean by this, right? And to answer what he means, you'd have to answer what an unexamined life is, and you'd also have to answer, therefore, what, in light of what it is, why is it not worth living? So what does it really mean? And then B, what is an unexamined life, and what does it consist of precisely? And let me give you a little insight here. Question: does Socrates lead an examined or an unexamined life? Ding, ding, ding. He leads an examined life. And many of his, where does this take place? It takes place in a courtroom, and he's got a jury of 500 people, 500 of his fellow Athenian citizens. It's a powerful scene. And when he says the unexamined life is not worth living, he's accusing many people in the jury of leading an unexamined life. And the point is, in defending himself, this is a courtroom drama, he's on trial, and his strategy to defend himself, because the charges are an indication that he's lived a certain type of life. Therefore, his defense is to give an autobiographical account of his life. Here's the point. In the process of describing his life, he talks about coming into contact with people who he examines them, or you should say, perhaps, or we should say, he cross-examines them. And in the process of cross-examining them, he determines that they they lead an unexamined life. Another way to clarify the meaning of what the unexamined life is to understand what the examined life is, and then to think about what its opposite would look like. C, also, what is the examined life? What does it consist of based on the example of Socrates' depiction of his own life? So I've given you the answer there. Socrates depicts his own life as part of the central part of his defense speech. And he presents his own life. He doesn't quite explicitly say it, but effectively he does. He doesn't use that word specifically to describe himself, but he just spends copious amounts of time describing his examination of others, his examination of the world, his pursuit of wisdom, his awareness that he lacks it. And So what is this? And if you ask what is the examined life, in a sense you're really asking, how does Socrates live as a man or as a human being? How does Socrates live compared to his fellow citizens? Because he's clearly different, and that's part of the reason he's on trial. D, what makes the unexamined life not worth living? He makes a very powerful claim when he says the unexamined life is not worth living. Right? He's saying the person who doesn't live an examined life, their life is worthless. That is of course there's some irony here that he's on trial and he's making condescending and humiliating statements to the jury that has his life in their hands. To put it another way, why is the examined life so worth living as you understand it? So this is a two-part part D. And then E, in light of Socrates' trial and conviction, what, on the other hand, makes the examined life potentially so dangerous? So, when we started out looking at the Platonic, this is a broader question, and I'm going to point you again in the direction of the answers. When we started out looking at the Platonic dialogues, we looked at what philosophy was, what a Platonic dialogue did. It raised fundamental questions, provocative questions. It brought the most important issues of a human being's life before the tribunal of reason, right? And this is a kind of active enlightenment. It's a kind of active interrogation. And in many ways we see solely positive consequences because of our belief in the efficacy of human reason, particularly as moderns who we talked about are products of the Enlightenment. So in fact, some of that discussion happens in the introduction to the Platonic dialogues. It happens in an analysis of the Apology, and that discussion also carries over into the Allegory of the Cave. So all the videos have elements of this discussion. What about this inquiry is so dangerous? And the evidence that it is dangerous is the very reaction of his citizens, of his fellow citizens, to an inquiry that I think many of us might seem as rather harmless. Now, on one hand, it is true that he is in an ancient society that, while it is one of the most, ancient Athens was one of the most tolerant societies in the ancient world. It was democratic. It had a powerful form of free speech. It had majority rule. It was tolerant both of its citizens, but also of foreigners coming to Athens and enriching its culture the way foreigners come to New York and make it a very special kind of melting pot, different from the rest of the United States, from what they call fly by and fly around country, right, where all the deplorables live. Okay, so what makes what he does so dangerous? And it has to do with specifically what philosophy is. And I talk about that in detail. Okay, so let's move on to the last one here, and we shall wrap up. Is it all on this? Okay. So this is the Allegory of the Cave. Explain specifically what an allegory is and interpret the hidden meaning behind the various elements of the Allegory of the Cave in Plato's Book 7 of the Republic. Use your imagination. Okay, let me say a few things. The first question here, dealing with Othello, confines its concern for the Allegory of the Cave simply for the issue of appearance and reality and how that works. That is not unimportant here, but I'm asking something slightly different. I am asking specifically what an allegory is, some type of metaphor or symbolic speech that needs to be translated. And what I'm asking for, what are the symbolic meanings of the elements of the cave? And obviously, issues of appearance and reality are going to come up, but that's not, I'm not asking quite the same thing. Provide a comprehensive analysis and interpretation of the meaning of the allegory of the cave. Do so by considering the following items listed below and identified in the story. In answering questions, make sure to work from big to small, general to specific claims. For example, establish a general claim about the meaning of the cave and the world outside of it. So, what I mean by general to specific, don't start talking about the shackles that the prisoners have, right? Because you haven't established the context they're in, or the situation, right? So the general context we have, the big picture is the world outside and the cave down below, right? And then you have things within the cave, more major things and then more minor things. And you want to go in order of significance. I mean, in a sense, everything is significant. Every detail, as we said when we interpret it, is there for a reason. But you need to establish that there's a prisoner with the shackle on before you can establish the meaning of the shackles, and so on. Also, make sure to discuss the distinction of opinion and knowledge. So that runs parallel to the difference between appearance and reality, right? Opinion is what you believe based on what appears to be the case, and knowledge is knowledge of truth or knowledge of reality, and their relationship to the elements of the allegory. So here I've given you the list. This is exactly identical to the reading response. And there's no point in really going over them because I think I've said more than enough. So if you have any questions, contact me. I will be keeping on my email daily and maybe twice a day to get back to students. If it turns out you have a serious situation and need more time, by all means, please get in touch and let me know, and we will work that out. But for me to give you that kind of leeway, I need the details, and you need to get in touch. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Have a good night.